is very often a practical wisdom, and it is a wisdom.
It's a kind of prophetic wisdom of the particular. It doesn't reach to the idea, but it reaches to the particular. Yeah. Those damn Greeks are not going to be beat. He knew that.
Yeah, he says, no, there's something about those Greeks. You shouldn't do that. And Xerxes is so puzzled. He says, you strange man, he says to him, what, I pray you, are the two things you speak of? Does my land army seem to you too small in number? And will the Greeks, think you, bring into the field a more numerous host? Or is our fleet, which you consider, is it our fleet which you consider to be weaker than theirs? Or are you fearful on both accounts? If in your judgment we fall short in either respect, it were easy to bring together with all speed another armament. I mean, if you want more men, I will bring you another 5 million, if that's all you're talking about. And Artabanus tries to tell him, he says, look, that doesn't have anything to do with it. No, to the contrary, they are weaker than we are in number. Their armies do not remotely approximate the number of your armies, nor does their navy in any way come to the size of your navy. But that's not the point, you see. There's something else about these Greeks. Well, you might,
and he doesn't know what it is, but he knows that it is.
Yeah. And it's useless to try to tell Xerxes all this. Xerxes we say simply, it is beyond his imagination. His imagination does not reach beyond size, multitude of sheer number. That is what constitutes power and constitutes force, and it's a very, very limited idea. It's extremely limited.
The Greeks had a hold of the thing that has no limits. Really, the Greeks reached to God himself. They reached to the idea of God. Xerxes never did. Now, Artabanus reached to the Greeks. He saw that they had something that puzzled him, and he knew that they were unbeatable.
You see, I can't remember. I've forgotten Artabanus' history. I haven't read this for a while.
I don't remember.
But
he's a constant advisor.
Yeah, and he knows the Greeks.
He said
he's been among them, and he knows them.
Yeah, he said not to fight the war in the first place. He advised against it. And in fact, he was accused of treachery by one of the bad fellows. I remember there was an argument where Xerxes depended, of course, upon advisors, and someone said, well, Artabanus lived among the Greeks, and he's a traitor. And Xerxes says, oh, no. He said, I know better than that. He's telling me what he believes in the sincerity of his heart. But he said, of course, we won't follow his advice. Xerxes also does have a kind of wisdom. We mustn't underestimate Xerxes. The fact that he weeps, the fact that he's sad about life, indicates that he is touched by truth.
Well, he's seen something like one of the first fundamental truths that strikes anyone who lives in this world for any length of time.
I was reminded of the East, when you think about this whole question of the famous story of Prince Gotama, who was Buddha. That when he was a boy, his father, the king, received a prophecy that he would, the boy would give up the kingdom, would not rule after him. And so he tried to protect him. And the boy was brought up in a walled garden, sealed off from the whole world. And the story goes that when he was an adolescent, he got out of the garden finally one day. And then there are 3 things that he meets. He meets poverty, sickness, and death. And meeting those 3 things, he renounces the kingdom and becomes Buddha. That is, gives up the world, gives up the kingdom. Well, that's a really oriental story. That is, Xerxes would understand that right away. Xerxes understands poverty and sickness and death. He understands that this greatness that he has can be taken away. He sees Priam's citadel.
Yeah.
And he sees that it fell, that it's dust. He has that sense. But of course, Buddha nor Xerxes ever knew anything else. That is, their philosophy is negative, purely negative. They do not understand God. That beyond sickness, beyond poverty, and beyond death, there is eternal life. That doesn't exist. It's a purely negative religion, a negative philosophy, and I'm about to say something disputable here. Now, I think we kind of take for granted that most of what we say is common sense and would be willing to stand by it. But now I'm going to say something that may be wrong, but it came to mind, and I think it's thoughtful. Well, what do you think about this? After all, conversations have to do with this, too. It's not apt for Christianity. That is, without Greece, well, you can't convert the Orientals without. They won't see it without Greece. In other words, you have to go through Socrates. You have to go through Homer and Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. Otherwise, you cannot discover God. Xerxes, if St. Paul had preached to Xerxes, I don't think it would have worked. St. Paul could have converted Socrates. And Socrates was apt, so much so that some of the fathers of the church actually, thought by some miracle Socrates was a Christian. In reading those dialogues, they just saw what Christ taught almost there. But that's not almost there with Xerxes.
Yeah, no, they're only at the beginning, really, and they never made the next step in them by themselves. And they didn't, even though they fought the Greeks, they never understood them. Of course, that is why. Well, I should go on with what you were saying and not get too far afield. But I was going to add that that is in fact what happened. That is history. One of the things that history shows is that the world was ready for Christ during the reign during the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire put into effect the ideas of the Greeks. That the Romans understood what the Greeks understood.
Christ was not incarnated in Sardis. Peter didn't found his church in Sardis.
I was going to say,
St. Thomas, the famous doubting Thomas, went to India. That is, the early church did go east, but nothing happened, or very little happened. I mean, there were converts. I mean, we don't mean to say that it isn't possible, but when you look at the procession of history, it went to Rome. It went west. Hilaire Belloc has that famous sentence: "Europe is the faith. The faith is Europe." And I don't know. He of course did that kind of thing deliberately. Hilaire Belloc was a controversial writer. He was a polemicist, which means battle. And he deliberately said things which he knew would infuriate everybody. Provocative phrase. But certainly among the variety of things that he meant by it was exactly what we're talking about here. That is, if you're going to convert India, you have to bring them Socrates.
No, the East.
And then Christ. That is, you cannot bring the faith without Europe. That's what he meant. And by Europe, he meant Western civilization.
Well, it's said that Christ was born in the fullness of time. Now, what does that phrase mean? Christ was born in the fullness of time. Well, it obviously means, among other things, that he was born at the right time, when there had arrived a certain perfection in the world. that was ripe. And that ripeness is another word for perfection, the metaphor of fruit or of maturity. And the world really matured in a natural way with the Greeks and the Romans who followed them. And you can see it very clearly when you read their literature. You can see it, it's ripening. And then the world really was converted. It turned out it's amazing. It was, it's hard to imagine. I was going to say a while back that you realize that when you said that Xerxes really wouldn't have noticed Socrates, Xerxes or Cyrus or Darius didn't notice the Jews in the Old Testament. You remember, we're back now.
Well, the Jews noticed Cyrus, didn't they?
Yes, they knew.
I mean, he occupies the Old Testament a great place.
But they didn't pay any attention to the Jews because why? Well, the Jews were insignificant. They were so small. They were just a homeless, insignificant people. Hardly better than a bunch of nomads so far as the great. And their cities were nothing. They had no great art.
We think of the Temple of Solomon.
Yeah.
Cyrus allowed it to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
It had been destroyed, by the Syrians, and Cyrus was very benign. He was a good man.
Yes.
And he permitted the Jews to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. But he did that the way a traveler to an insignificant city would say, "Oh, sure, you go ahead and do that, just so long as you don't bother me." That really
it's harmless. The Jews were considered to be harmless people. They never amounted to anything as a military force. The Solomon's Magnificent was about as close as they came to magnificence.
We're sort of at the capital of Topeka, though.
That's what you're talking about.
Where it wasn't.
The whole of this period in history is a period of conflict among the great empires. The Egyptian Empire is one that's talked about. That's the second book.
Well, they had magnificence.
They had magnificence.
Those pharaohs had that magnificence. Those
great tombs of the Egyptians. Those great statues, the Sphinx. You think of those figures. Now, it seems it's when you try to carve heads of Teddy Roosevelt into a mountainside as compared to the Sphinx, it's a little ridiculous. Really. It is ridiculous. I admire Teddy Roosevelt, but that he's not. It's absurd, really.
A Republican president doesn't have the greatness.
No, but the Egyptians had it. The Babylonians had it. Just those names. You talk about Babylon. Why? You think of the hanging gardens of Babylon. You think of that magnificent city. All of those. Sidon is mentioned there. That's another one. Or Sardis.
Nineveh, Tyre,
Persepolis. All of those. Just the names. Even if you don't know very much about them.
When you say Athens and Sparta, not at all. Sparta was a country village.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, we couldn't find it.
Nothing is left of Sparta at all. There were no.
There's nothing there to begin with.
There's nothing there to survive. It wasn't as if you'd go down there and find the ruins of some temples. They said, well, there weren't any temples. They never built any. They were a little farming community that was down there, and
they won Thermopylae.
They defeated the Persians at Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans.
They had glory, but they did not have magnificence.
Yeah. That's you'd say that the Jews who had God and who had God only, that was all they had. As if that wasn't enough, they had God, but they had nothing else, and they were overlooked by all of these great, magnificent empire builders. They were just a kind of nuisance, and if they got in your way, well, you enslaved them. You just went in and you overran them and you made slaves out of them, which was about all they were fit for, so far as they were concerned. They were nothing more than a minor nuisance, and yet that we say, above all, the Jews did not have this magnificence at all.
Just as a matter of fact, in this whole book, the Jews aren't even mentioned, are they?
No, I don't.
They're
never mentioned.
I don't think the name appears.
No.
And Lord knows he goes into detail about everybody else.
Oh yes, there are a million names in here. But
I never thought of that before. Yeah. That's shocking, isn't it? It doesn't even mention it.
Whereas the Persians are mentioned in the Bible.
Oh boy, they play a tremendous role. In fact, Cyrus was looked upon as something of a messiah, as a savior, because he did permit the Jews to practice their religion and our religion. And finally even to rebuild the temple. In other words, Cyrus was a benign man. Now, so is Xerxes. I think, again, when we think of great Oriental potentates,
despots, we call them.
We get a Hollywood image.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, what Hollywood has, what Cecil B. DeMille has done.
Yeah, there was a man who was obsessed with the ideal of magnificence.
But it was
tried.
Yeah, what he conceived of was pure parody of what it was, because he makes them inevitably utterly cruel and inhuman, indifferent, cold. I think Shelley is in part responsible for that. Remember that famous line? It is a great sonnet. Now, how do you pronounce that? Ozymandias?
Ozymandias.
I've always said Ozymandias, and now I'm not sure. I'm nervous about my pronunciation.
It's the verse.
I've always said Ozymandias.
Look upon me. I am Ozymandias, King of Kings.
One of the most famous sonnets ever written in the English language, and it's very good.
We have students memorize that.
It's again, Shelley in our time has been not been popular, but he is one of the great British poets. But he has that sonnet, and he has that phrase, the sneer of cold command. That is in the statue of the pharaoh. There is this sneer.
Right.
Sneer of cold command. It's a beautiful phrase, but it's not true. Even the pharaoh in the time of Moses didn't have a sneer of cold command. The pharaoh is rather a childish person, very much like Xerxes. He's puzzled by Moses.
Yes.
And he says, well, we won't do that. And then when the miracles happen, he weeps for his children.
He said, you do your magic and I'll do my magic. Let's see who's got the better magic here. He looks at it in those terms,
But Shelley was thinking of modern politics. Shelley was thinking of Napoleon.
Yes.
He was thinking of a whole world which we're not talking about at all. And Cecil B. DeMille is a kind of bastard child of Shelley. What an awful thing to say, poor Shelley. But it's true, I think, that Hollywood has that romantic view that a despot, a tyrant, must be that cruel and utterly inhuman, cold. Cyrus is a man of deep compassion. And cruelty. Yeah, he's capable of both.
Well, yes, you see great cruelty. I had occasion this summer, I think it was, or early this fall, to reread a lot of the Cyropedia of Xenophon, another very great Greek writer, a younger contemporary of Socrates.
A student of
Socrates.
Like Plato.
Yes, he was a student of Socrates.
Yeah, I've never read that at all.
It's marvelous.
I bet it is.
It's marvelous. It's called, translated, the Education of Cyrus, and the first book or two has to do with the education of Cyrus as a young man, as a child and a young man, and that is the best part of the book. But then he goes on to tell the whole history of Cyrus. This was Xenophon, who was a student of Socrates, he was so interested in the Persians that he went to Persia and visited there, and he found out all about Cyrus and wrote this marvelous story, this history of Cyrus. And you will not come away from that book thinking that Cyrus was just a despot. You are filled with admiration for him. He really was a very great man.
I say the Hebrews were. I mean, in the Old Testament, Cyrus is looked up to as a marvelous man.
Yeah. Well,
a great man.
Yeah. I remember even, I believe that modern scholars rather think that the Oriental despot in Esther, the book of Esther. Now, what's his name? I know it so well. The king there,
I'm close, but I missed it.
Ahasuerus, I think it's called. I think they say that that's Xerxes.
I didn't know.
See, the name sounds a little bit like it. I think they say that it's sort of the Hebrew version of. I don't think this is anything certain, but I think they identify him with Xerxes.
Oh.
And again, he is a despot and he's a cruel man. He kills his wife. His wife disobeys him, and he has her killed. And then he takes Esther for his wife, the Jewish woman, and she saves the whole Jewish people through Xerxes. But again, Xerxes is not he is not an unkind man, and God uses Xerxes as a savior for the Jewish nation. It's through him that they are saved from terrible destruction, and it's
he has compassion.
He has compassion.
Well, we use the word childish 2 or 3 times. Children are cruel, horrifyingly cruel. They'll torture a frog. Little boys will go out into the creek and do the most terrifying thing, and yet they'll turn around and do something so loving and so kind and so beautiful. You never know what a child is going to do. There's a spontaneity and a capriciousness about them. They don't follow principle. They haven't achieved the age of reason. And that's true about these Oriental despots. If you can touch Xerxes' heart, he will be benevolent.
He'll do anything for you. There are stories like this. The thing about this book, Herodotus, is it's filled with these marvelous stories. Stories of remarkable acts of gratitude. Very often, on the part of the Persians, someone will do them a favor. There's a story I'll tell at another time of an emperor who, when he is not an emperor, when he's just an ordinary soldier, someone does him a favor, and many years later, when he becomes the emperor, this man appears before him, and he remembers this kindness that this man did for him for no reason at all, because he wasn't a powerful man, and he repays him magnificently. He's deeply grateful to him. And that, again, it has a kind of simplicity about it. That generosity, that spontaneous generosity in this particular case. Now, I've forgotten which emperor it was, but you wouldn't describe him as uniformly generous.
But there's no principle. Do you remember, you probably don't remember, but you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about something else, and I can't remember even what it was anymore. We were talking about some local situation here, some problem, and persons having to do with it. And I remember pounding the table and saying, if there's one thing I can't stand, it's a man of principle.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. Yeah.
Now, of course, we don't. That doesn't mean that we admire men without principle. That is, an unprincipled man is a terrible thing. But there is something frightening about a person who lives on nothing but principles. That is, who has that inflexible idea that ethics is geometry.
Yeah, who lives by formulas, rigid formulas.
It's a terrifying thing to see in the church, for example. It's one of the reasons why these terrible liberal theologians have got so far as they have. That is, they've been criticizing something which has been true about us. That is, there has been in the Catholic Church, I think especially since the Council of Trent, there has been a kind of Cartesian inflexibility, a kind of mathematicism systematization of ethics,
legalism, we call it.
Legalistic, and an inflexibility about it. The wonder of these children, of these men, is that they deal with reality. They have a grasp on the level of the concrete of the way things really are. And their cruelty has about it a kind of magnificence. That is, if they turn around and execute 10,000 people, there's usually a reason for it. they've been provoked. Some terrible thing has happened, and their cruelty has about it a sort of response. The word response means spontaneity done again. That is, somebody does something to you, and you do something to them. And there is, in that sort of response, something natural, and therefore something true. Now, of course, you cannot build a church upon spontaneity alone. You cannot build a church upon children. You remember St. Paul says that he wants us to be as children, but he says, now, I don't mean children in intelligence, he says. I mean children in innocence, but not children in intelligence. You have to grow up and put childish things from you. He very, very carefully distinguishes that. So we're not being sentimental here, talking about romanticism.
What we say about children is that they're willful. Children are willful and they're spontaneous, but they are also they're unpredictable. I'm groping for the word. They have a kind of arbitrariness about them.
Even contrary.
Yeah. That one minute they'll be nice to their little sister or brother. The next minute they'll be cruel.
Like April.
Hit them over the head, with something hard. They don't care. They know they're hurting them. It's a kind of deliberate, really cruelty, and it's this whimsical. That's it's not exactly the word I was looking for, but kind of whimsicality about them, as if they are. In fact, I think very often parents, in a kind of joking way, talk about very little children as if they are little tyrants. They say they're little tyrants. My lord and master. They talk about their little children because they behave as if they are the center of the universe, and they think they are really, and they're quite frightening.
They go into rages and then they weep.
Yes. Rages and weeping. That's so characteristic of it.
And this book, this procession of history, has to do with this moment when the East meets the West. As we're still at the Hellespont. We're right at the crossing, and Xerxes is defeated. That is, God is the God of history. God wrote many books. We think of Revelation, and we say, well, of course we know that Revelation is the Bible. It's the Old Testament and the New Testament. Every word of which is the revelation of God. Yes, that's true. But then we know that God created the universe. He created the creation. And that's a kind of book. We've talked about that before. A great deal of the wonder of Homer is that Homer is able to read trees and rocks and sea. We talked about harbors and things. He's able to read them as words of some revelation, which he didn't quite comprehend, but he knew that they were significant. Well, we've got the Word of God as revelation in the Bible. We've got the Word of God as revelation in the creation, but we've got it in history too. And Herodotus is our first example of this, where we really can see. I say we can see, because Herodotus doesn't see it, but we can see that there is a providential, there is a divinity which moves behind us. Herodotus sees it as a fatality, sees it as a fate. After all, we haven't mentioned this. This book is divided into 9 books, and they're named after the 9 muses. which is very mysterious.
Those are their traditional names. There's no question that it is divided into 9 books. That is, if you get an old manuscript of this in Greek, you wouldn't see book 1, book 2, and all that. But there is no question when you read through it. You'll see that there are 9 distinct books.
You mean we don't know who made that division? It might not have been.
No, we don't.
With a later editor.
Probably, yes. Probably.
Well, that doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I wanted to mention it, but it doesn't make any difference. That is the
because the person who divided it the way you do a turkey.
Yeah,
that is, there are wings and there are.
You can see it with perfect clarity. You just read book 1, and you'll get to the end of book 1 with the defeat of Croesus and the end of the Lydian Empire. That's what book 1 is about. And you immediately then you go to book 2, and that's about Egypt. That's the next conquest of Cyrus, and the whole thing is about Egypt. It's very, very clear. There's no difficulty in making distinctions at all. And they were named after the 9 muses. And the edition that we use, it's about the only one available, I think, in translation is the modern library edition, and it does list the books in order, starting with Clio. That's the traditional order. This is the order in which the muses are named in what's his name? The rival of Homer. What's his name?
Oh, Hesiod.
This is the order. It starts with Clio, which is the muse of history. They're in a certain
before Herodotus.
Right. They're in a certain order. It starts as it happens.
The assignment is rather difficult to figure out.
Oh, I've tried. I've exhausted my ingenuity, such as it is, attempting to see a connection, and I can't see any connection at all between the names, that is the muses, and what takes place in them. The first book is Clio, and it does have to do with history, and in some way the whole of this story is bound up in that very first book, in which Solon comes and we get the history of the Lydian Empire, and in a way that is simply repeated over and over again in the next 8 books. You have the encounter between Solon, the Greek, the great famous lawgiver.
He's the equivalent of Socrates for us, that he is a Greek with a Greek philosophical mind.
Right, and he comes in his travels to Lydia, and there, which is just across the Mediterranean. It isn't a great distance, and in his travels he comes to Lydia, and there, as a distinguished visitor, he meets Croesus, and Croesus is one of the richest men in the world, has one of the greatest empires, although it's small by comparison to the Persians, as it turns out. But at that time, he considered himself to be one of the contenders for world domination, because that was one of the desires of all of the Persians. All of these great cities of Babylon and the Egyptians, they all desired world conquest, and he was ambitious, and he spoke to Solon of his great wealth, and he asked. Then he asked Solon a question. He knew that Solon is a philosopher, and he knew what a philosophical question was. In fact, he knew what the philosophical question was. He said to Solon, "Who do you think is the happiest man in the world?" And of course, he expected Solon to say that Croesus was the happiest man in the world, because he had seen all of the wealth and the power of Croesus, and Solon did not give him the answer he expected. He gave him an astonishing answer. He gave him an example of somebody that he had never heard of in his whole life. someone that no one had ever heard of in their whole life. In fact, he gave him 2 examples of people who were happier than he was, and it just Croesus just could not understand it at all. It just absolutely baffled him.
It offended him even.
And it offended him. Yes. He just said, "Well, this can't really be a wise man because he can't see that I'm the happiest of men." And it was after Solon tells him the stories of 2 happy, the examples of happy people who died happily, who were insignificant men, who were not famous or who were not powerful and were certainly not rich. And the point of each of the stories is, as he sums it up, he says, "Count no man happy until he's dead." Now that sounds like Socrates. You see, that really does sound like Socrates. That's wisdom.
It's the end.
Yeah.
It's that telos.
Yeah. And Croesus doesn't understand it, but then he is conquered by Cyrus, and then he learns. He discovers the meaning of what Solon has told him. He grasps, not that he becomes a philosopher. I don't think he ever does become a philosopher, but he does begin to grasp this point of Greek wisdom, that somehow...
Well, he grasps it negatively.
Yes, negatively. Yeah.
That is, he doesn't see
what it is that is the happy life.
Yeah, right.
He doesn't see what it is. He sees what it isn't.
He doesn't see that the end is outside, in some way outside the line.
Yeah.
He only sees it from the inside.
Yeah.
He sees it as a loss.
Yes.
As pure loss.
He says,
because he loses his kingdom and his riches.
He loses his kingdom.
In fact,
his children.
He's going to be burned at the stake.
And he's going to be burned. He's on the funeral pyre. This is the great beginning of this whole story. I suppose the most famous single incident at least in the first part of this, and one of the most famous in the book, is the scene in which he is placed on a pyre to be burned alive. Burned alive. Now, there's cruelty. There's Oriental, Eastern cruelty for you. And this was the normal thing to do.
Was that Darius or Cyrus?
That was Cyrus. Cyrus, yes. Cyrus is there. Cyrus is there watching him, and he's the emperor, and this is his rival, and and now he's going to be executed. He's killed his children. All of his sons have all been murdered, and now he's going to die. And as he is there on the funeral pyre, and they start the fire, he cries out. He says, "Oh, Solon, Solon." He sees the point. Now that he's dying, he realizes
I'm not the happiest man.
I'm not the happiest man. What Solon says is, well, if you think that these things, these riches, are going to make you happy, he says, well, just wait. That's what he said. He says, just wait, because he's thinking about fortune. He's thinking about how fickle fortune is, that those people who depend upon their wealth and riches and their power always find that those things desert them in their hour of need, and then they fall. And this is what has happened to Croesus. And he cries out, "Oh, Solon, Solon!" And Cyrus hears him. Again, this is just like all of these men. He hears him. They're very interested in things. These men like Cyrus. They're
not cold.
They're not cold. They're
indifferent.
They're very alive. He hears him, and he says, "Wait a minute." He says, "I think he's calling out to his God. I think he's crying out to some divinity." He's never heard of Solon. He can't perhaps hear what he's saying, but he said, "Let's see if he comes and rescues him." And now I'm trying to remember the story.
Well,
I think
they unhook him.
A rainstorm comes along.
Oh, is it?
I hope I'm not mixing it up with another story.
Ah.
And puts out
I
the
thought
fire.
Cyrus was so curious that he actually unties him and says he wants to find out.
Yeah.
He wants to satisfy his curiosity.
Yeah.
But you may be right. Again, we should have reread this scene. I don't remember.
Yeah, I didn't read it last semester, which is the problem. He says, we've still got a little bit of time, not a great deal.
He certainly asks him. That is, Cyrus is close enough to
Oh,
him.
yes. Well, he asks him then.
Who is Solon, and what is it that you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
And then Croesus tells him the story.
Yeah.
And Cyrus is so struck that he releases him.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't remember that there was
I know not whether
Naturally.
Cyrus was minded to make an offering of the first fruits to some god or other, or whether he had vowed a vow and was performing it, or whether, as may well be, he had heard that Croesus was a holy man, and so wished to see if any of the heavenly powers would appear to save him from being burned alive. However it might be, Cyrus... See, Herodotus says, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't really know. However it might be, Cyrus was thus engaged, and Croesus was already on the pile when it entered his mind, in the depth of his woe, that there was a divine warning in the words which had come to him from the lips of Solon. No one while he lives is happy. When this thought smote him, he fetched a long breath, and breaking his deep silence, groaned out aloud, thrice uttering the name of Solon. Cyrus caught the sounds and bade the interpreters inquire of Croesus who it was he called on. They drew near and asked him, but he held his peace, and for a long time made no answer to their questionings, until at length, forced to say something, he exclaimed, "One I would give much to see converse with every monarch." Not knowing what he meant by this reply, the interpreters begged him to explain himself, and as they pressed for an answer and grew to be troublesome, he told them how a long time before Solon, an Athenian, had come and seen all his splendor and made light of it. And then Cyrus, hearing from the interpreters what Croesus said, relented, bethinking himself that he too was a man, and that it was a fellow man, and one who had once been as blessed by fortune as himself, that he was burning alive, afraid, moreover, of retribution, and full of the thought that whatever is human is insecure. So, yeah, you're right. I'm thinking of another story.
Yeah, but that is so perfect. I mean, every word of that scene is perfect.
Yeah.
We could sum it up by saying that this is the Hellespont. This is the Orient. That is the greatest achievement of the Orient, is that negation of the world. They do see that. They do see that at the height of magnificence, that beyond magnificence, there's nothing. They had that sense of disaster, of nothing, of dust.
All of this greatness, and you know, the very fact of seeing it, of course, makes it all the more poignant, because they had it. They
had compassion.
Yeah.
As we speak about the compassionate Buddha. He does have that.
Yeah.
When he saw the sick man and the dead man and the poor man, his next impulse was, "Oh, my heart goes out. I too will be sick. I too will be poor. I too will die. And therefore, I have compassion. I feel with you." And there it stops. Now, Socrates sees beyond that. He sees that the truth is not simply that there's no happiness in this world. Socrates actually sees that there is a happiness, and that it is, what is it? I mean, Socrates sees what it is. It is to know and to love the truth. They never see that. They never get that positive grasp. They never understand being. They understand non-being. That they understand, but they don't rise to the Greek idea.
No, you see it even, well, you see it, of course, in Homer. Homer also sees that.
He sees
in poetry. He sees that. At the end of the Iliad, they rise to an understanding of the, well, or to the experience of of something very great and very noble.
They love the good.